This is the Finding Business Happy podcast with me, Janelle McGrath, the founder of Market Veep. This show is all about helping you to live your best life inside and outside of work as a leader in business. Because let's face it, what's important is finding your business happy. Thanks so much for joining today, the Finding Business Happy podcast. Today we're talking with Hamish Knox on all things sales training for sustainable scalability. And so those who know, Hamish is the owner of Sandler Calgary and the host of the Full Funnel Freedom podcast. Highly recommend listening in to him as well. But thank you so much for joining. And I'd love to hand it off to you and have you share a little bit about your journey.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me, Janelle. And everybody listen to Janelle's episode of the Full Funnel Freedom podcast, because she shared some incredible ideas and insights around marketing. And marketing in my world, marketing is everything that happens before you say hello. And then usually where I support my clients is after the hello happens, and everything from hi, nice to meet you, all the way through to, hey, hasn't this been a great X number of year relationship? How can we make it a great X number of year longer relationship? My journey, though, starts in a village of 500 people in rural British Columbia, exactly halfway on the Trans-Canada Highway between Calgary and Vancouver, 6 hours in either direction, as long as you follow the speed limit.
Never.
That's the official. So when I visit, but my parents still live on the farm down there, and so whenever we go down every year, my daughters and I, for my dad's birthday at the end of June, and when we show up, I just say to my mom, "Yeah, we left at midnight. It was like 40 miles an hour the whole way. We took our time." And she's like, "I know you're lying to me." I was like, "Well, do you want to know the truth, or do you want to feel good about the fact that we're here?" She's like, "I'd rather feel good about the fact that we're here." I was like, "Good. So let's just have this fiction between us and we'll just enjoy our visit together." So I started there. I moved out at 18 down to Vancouver because there wasn't really anything to do in the village I grew up in that I really wanted to do. I actually started as a journalist. So I actually started a high school sports column at my weekly paper in the town next to the one I grew up in, which is where I went to high school. And then I continued as a journalist for the other press in New Westminster, British Columbia. Went to Douglas College.
Where you honed your mad sales skills.
Honed the mad sales
right?
skills. Well, script writing. Well, and also I became the advertising sales manager. So I was the sports editor, and the ad sales manager left. And, at a small publication, they're like, "Well, you want to draw the short straw?" And I was like, "Sure." I'm talking to people, right? Because it's interviewing. All I'm doing is interviewing. And so that's what really informed my sales style. And then let's fast forward. I was working for a company called Canada Newswire, and I was basically their big buck hunter in Western Canada. So any Fortune 100 companies from British Columbia to Manitoba that were not currently working with Canada Newswire, they were my client. They were my prospects. So I'm used to cold calling CEOs and CFOs of multi-billion-dollar publicly traded organizations and getting them to switch their services over to Canada Newswire. And then they said, "Well, you're already traveling across Western Canada. You're the only rep that we have who travels outside of a specific office. How about you become our SaaS specialist as well?" Because the SaaS specialist had left. And I was like, "Okay." So then I've got this split brain of CEOs, CFOs, VPs of investor relations, multi-billion-dollar companies, and then walk down the hall and talk to the VP of communications and the VP of IT about media monitoring, crisis management, firewalls, all that kind of stuff. And my last sales manager, who's thanked in my first book, we were in Montreal for meetings, and we randomly decided to have dinner at the same restaurant. And so I walked in and said, "Table for one." And they said, "Go sit at the bar, loser," or something in French. And I look up and he's there. And so we're chatting, and he's, ex IBM, Xerox, Bell, Rogers. So he's done lots of training, and I'm chatting and sharing with him. And he says, "Have you ever heard of Sandler?" And I go, "Nope." And he says, "It's really how you think and talk and act." And I said, "Thanks, I think." And so that night I did some Googling because I couldn't sleep. And it was like I walked into a church and God spoke to me. I was like, how do I do this? So my now ex gave up a trip to Las Vegas over Canadian Thanksgiving in 2010 to go to Baltimore in November for what Sandler calls a discovery day, which is so you want to be a Sandler Trainer. And then I signed my franchise agreement January 1st of 2011 because I thought it was symbolic. The day I landed in Baltimore was the day that bin Laden was killed for my initial training. And my first day in business was May 11th of 2011. I made 5,000 cold calls in my first 6 months in Sandler. And that was either leaving a voicemail for or directly speaking with the decision maker. So 9 to 15,000 dials in my first 6 months that I made by myself. We did not have Connect and Sell or Orem or any of these dialers. I physically dialed that phone that many times. And since then, I was named Sandler Global Rookie of the Year for the year of 2011 in March of 2012. I published my first book, Accountability the Sandler Way, November 1st of 2014. My second book, Change the Sandler Way, in November of 2016. And March of 2020, I became the first Canadian recipient of the David H. Sandler Award, which is our highest non-selling honor. And it was cool for me because not only was it a nomination of my peers, and to this day, we nominate individuals for that award every year, it was also a vote of my peers. So I was the first person to ever be voted on as the recipient. So my peers globally not only nominated me, but they selected me as the recipient of that award, which is pretty cool.
Such an honor.
Yes.
Right? Like there's so much more weight, I think, when it comes from your peers. I always talk with our team, and my husband works here too. He's our CFO. And we do this joke. I say yes more than you say no is my mentality. And I think your story is such a great example of saying yes, where a lot of people would say, oh, that seems like too much, or that's not the right time, or I don't know how to do that. And so that's an incredible journey. What kinds of industries have you been exposed to?
So because I'm based in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, the audience is probably expecting a lot of oil and gas, a lot of oil field services. And yeah, we've done a little of that. Calgary's got a really vibrant tech community. I've actually worked with, as of this conversation, 14 managed service IT companies. At one point, 8 of the CEOs were in our executive group because they all had outlooks of abundance and they thought that this would be really wonderful, to learn. And, oh yeah, there's plenty of business to go around. And in fact, in one case, one of those CEOs got an opportunity with a Chinese company, except they didn't have an IT tech that spoke Mandarin. And so they brought this up in one of our sessions, and one of the other CEOs in the room put up their hand and said, hey, I have someone like that. And I'm going to use the word trade, like an NBA trade. I don't know that it was literally the first round pick or something that went in another direction. But for all intents and purposes, the CEOs traded a tech so this one company could actually deliver on that contract. And both of them said, never would have had that experience unless we were in a session with you.
Wow. What are the odds too? Like such an odd circumstance.
Totally. So really, in terms of industries, we are industry agnostic because ultimately our work is for individuals is creating more effective human-to-human interactions professionally and personally. So if there are two human beings interacting in an organization, we will provide support and guidance. Media, software development, IT, obviously, oil field service, industrial construction, distribution companies, agriculture, all sorts of industries, specifically direct clients. And then because I'm fortunate enough to be invited to speak to associations and other mixed audiences, I've had an opportunity to support many, many individuals across North America and around the world.
That's awesome. Do you feel like, I know for us, like I love seeing the different industries and looking at the nuances. Sometimes we'll get people that come in and they're like, well, do you work in this particular vertical? And we'll say, we've come across it, but it's, not something that comes up often. But the way I look at that is sales process wise, like because you can touch and see so many different industries, the cross-pollination of the commonality of pain points, systems, operations, tools you can use, where if you stay only in one vertical, the exposure to those things just isn't as broad. What has your experience been with that?
So I have a longtime client. Her name is Tracy, and she was a manager at Xerox before she got into oil field sales. And we were having our quarterly review, and it was also our annual review. So we've been working together for a year, and this was our third quarterly engagement review. And we were having breakfast, and at one point she says, "You get to pick your clients." Yeah, I do. But who doesn't want to hang out with a bunch of smart, ambitious, driven, goal-oriented people every day? Like, you guys make me better. So from the exposure of these different worlds, and that's actually, I had another founder of a software company that we worked with until we helped him scale his business to the point where he had a very, very successful exit. He said, do you know why why we picked you. And I knew they were picking between us and like more of an executive coaching type company. And I said, no, was it because you like my haircut? And by the way, for the listeners, I use the level 1 buzz setting. So that's my haircut, everybody, right? It's short all over. And he said, it actually had nothing to do with your haircut. And I said, well, I'm not a mind reader. Like, please tell me, I'd love to know. And he said, well, obviously you've got great experience. You talk with people, you bring those insights to us. You bring a bunch of different people from a bunch of different industries into your training sessions on a regular basis. We all get to learn and grow together. You've got this wonderful learning management system that we can access 24 hours a day. And you also have this global network of people that if we come to you, and we've done this a couple of times already, and said, hey, we're struggling with this, you have said, well, I haven't had that experience. I don't have a direct client who's had that experience. I don't think there's anything in our learning management system. Let me reach out to my colleagues and see what I get back. And you've got back great insights for us that we've been able to implement to actually support our sustainably scale our business. And now, because at Sandler Summit, you're inviting us to come do that in person together. So that's why we picked you, is because it's not just you read a book once or you happen to, come up with some idea that you're just going to repeat over and over again. You're always learning and always growing, which helps us solve problems that we're not even going to know we have until we have them.
It's a great example. I think that there's a lot of people that experience that where you can't plan everything, even the best laid plans, especially in sales. I think that so many things come up and they're one-offs, they're snowflakes in terms of it may never happen again, but
Absolutely.
How do we handle this?
Absolutely.
Can you explain to the audience, for those who don't know what Sandler is, like how it works, why people use it?
So Sandler, founded by David Sandler, headquartered in Baltimore. So Sandler is the largest leadership and sales development company in the world. So currently operating in 30 countries, local offices like mine in Calgary. I believe we just opened up in the UAE, I think was our most recent office. We also have an enterprise team out of home office that works with giant companies like LinkedIn and Cemex and Salesforce and Gong and Medtronic and Emerson.
HubSpot.
Yeah, HubSpot as also another example of a partner of ours. Harvard integrated all of our content into their MBA program about pre-COVID. We had to start somewhere. And so ultimately, there are 3 outcomes that our clients are looking for. And so working with Sandler is not necessarily a check the box exercise, right? Like a lot of training. I've been in sales since I was 19. I had the check the box training, right? HR said we have to train our salespeople this year. So we brought someone in and they got excited and nothing changed. Now, I have said to companies where they do have that check the box mindset, hey, if you're going to pick somebody, I'd like you to pick me. Like, I mean, ultimately, I'm a business owner. I'd like to be able to do that. And are you open to a different way? So Sandler is built around the adult learning model, ongoing reinforcement over time, thin slicing content, going out and applying it. But ultimately, the 3 outcomes that our clients realize is, number 1, a common language across all client-facing team members and their leaders, right? And so accounts receivable is client-facing. We don't start with accounts receivable typically. However, they are client-facing, right? And Sandler, more effective human-to-human interactions, professionally, personally. The second outcome is a consistent, repeatable, sustainably scalable sales funnel, revenue funnel, cash engine, however you want to characterize that. So it always looks like a funnel instead of doing the accordion or the pencil or any of those things that the listeners might have experienced. And then the last outcome is not for all of our clients, right? Like some of these giant companies that we work with, is a business that they can sell for their number, not the number they're told to take. And one of the biggest fears of a business buyer is when the primary driver of the revenue engine goes away, and whether the founder is actively involved in selling or not, they're still in that primary driver. When they go away, does that revenue engine go from 8-cylinder to 2-stroke? And I'm not a car guy, but I do understand really big to really small. And so ultimately, the work that we allow our clients to do, or that we do with our clients, is making their revenue engine like interchangeable plastic blocks. So we can pop Janelle out, we can pop Diane in. It takes a second for the gears to connect. However, then Diane can continue to grow and scale the business so that she can eventually get a return on her investment when she wants to sell it. And this is the key thing, especially for our professional services clients. Janelle gets a check on closing day. There's no earnout. Because as I understand it from talking to a lot of entrepreneurs, earnouts suck.
You touch on a great point around the importance of the word ongoing. Because I think that there's a lot of times people think, I need help and I need somebody to come in and just fix the things that my salesperson is doing wrong or that they don't like. They might not be doing them wrong, but maybe the leader just doesn't like the style that they're doing them in. And so there's so much importance, I think, on that ongoing. It's not like you just do it once and then, okay, you've mastered this skill of sales and you're off to the races, that there's the ongoing. And I like the point too around the collaborative nature of a network and a group as a sounding board. Do you find that people, the initial interactions, right? Is there a lot of pushback when somebody says, yeah, we're coming in, we're going to change everything? I know on our side, it can go one of two ways. They're either really excited or they're like, I like the way I'm doing things. But what has been your experience?
Absolutely. Well, human beings fear death, taxes, and change. And change, because our brains are still wired wherever you, listener, believe we came from, wherever human beings came from. Change used to mean you died or you went hungry and then you died. So you were still dead. You were just more or less hungry when you actually died, right? So our brain is wired to keep us safe, which usually means stuck. And so similar in my world is we tell our clients, and we always are starting with the leader, right? And that they're bringing us in, crawl, walk, run. Can we push everybody in the pool at once? Absolutely. Does it usually go sideways? Absolutely. So we want to baby step our way in and build that out with our clients, because no one wants to have their baby called ugly. And oftentimes, that example of the salesperson who's, maybe not performing or whatever, one of the more nurturing questions that I will ask a founder or CEO is, well, did you hire him that way or did you make him that way? Because it's got to be one of the two. Like they either showed up like that or through bad leadership, they became that way because that's what got rewarded. And, usually that's not the first question I will ask. That's usually after we've built some rapport.
Tough love conversation.
Well, because otherwise, what are you paying me for? Because if you're paying me for just be like, hey, Janelle, everything's awesome. Yeah, just send me a check every month and just keep doing what you're doing. Like, no, that's not the business you or I are in.
Nobody wins. We had somebody come in, a prospect, and he's a sales leader, and he said, we're bought in. We want to use HubSpot. We planning on signing the contract in 5 days, and we have a 30-person sales team. Can you get everything configured in 2 weeks?
Oi.
I was like, no, we cannot. This is a hard no. It's impossible. You have people who have been doing this job for years, have processes, Excel sheets, notepads, nothing documented. You have no defined sales process. You currently have no technology or system in place. And you want training too. So you want it configured and train all of these people where they have full adoption. Just logically doesn't connect the
Not
dots.
happening.
So having difficult conversations with leaders, I think, is so important. Is tough sometimes as it is, I think, for leaders to hear, but it also helps protect the team that they have so that they stay and they like their job, right?
Totally.
So you don't want salespeople who hate coming to work. You want to make it easier.
Absolutely.
Do you get a lot of pushback? I'm sure, CRMs are a mixed 3-letter word that you hear. What is the spectrum of what feelings and emotions that come out when you start talking about it?
Well, because for me, it's the gamut, right? It's everything from Rage Against the Machine all the way to this is the greatest thing I've ever heard in my life. And the thing with the CRM is it's a tool, right? It doesn't matter what it is. It's what's the mountaintop we're trying to hit. And that's ultimately what we need to keep in mind. I was interviewing a sales leader recently who had been through a bunch of acquisitions. And so one of the things that we were talking about is how do you get continued through the acquisition, right? So the acquirer keeps you on. What do you do? And they were saying that they are on their third call review platform in the last 18 months. because they've been through a bunch of acquisitions. And by the way, the one they're using is not their favorite, because their favorite, oddly enough, was the one that they picked before they got acquired. However, what they said is they are very, very good using the one they are mandated to use now, because the mountaintop is not what is the tool. It's they need to be able to review the calls and provide coaching to their frontline leaders and to their team members. So keeping in mind, what is that mountaintop? What are we trying to accomplish with that CRM? And we at Sandler Calgary use HubSpot and love HubSpot as well. So we got on board with them well before Sandler did corporately. And ultimately, from my perspective as a sales leader, because I am the sales leader in my organization, I want to have a very quick, clear snapshot of, is it likely I'm going to hit my target for the month, for the quarter, whatever that might be. Now that's the mountaintop. There's lots of stuff that goes into that. And I have to make sure that my team is able to leverage the CRM, whatever CRM we're using, in the way that fits with their world. Because back when I was at Canada Newswire, we implemented a different CRM. It is a force in the CRM world, and we got to 65% adoption, I think, nationally. And the only way that we got to that point is because we tied it to the comp plan. And if it didn't live in the CRM, it did not exist. However, what I've experienced with CRM rollouts is the leader figures out how they want to use it, and they say, thou shalt do it this way. Well, the problem is, like a seller discounting the buyer and trying to push them down a path the buyer doesn't want to go, the sales leader is now pushing their reps down a path they don't want to go. When I used that other CRM, I loved it because I popped up in the morning and it said, bink, here's your tasks. Here's the people you're calling. Here's the events you click, save, new thing, go from there. I had other colleagues who would wait till the end of the day, and they just made 30 minutes at the end of every day, and they just entered all their stuff in. And I had some colleagues who would wait till the end of every week. And of course, those were the ones who were actually using the system. Some people waited till never to implement the CRM. And so ultimately—
that 35%.
Exactly, that 35%. We ultimately have to give our sellers and our other team members using the CRM the freedom and the flexibility to hit the mountaintop in their own way. As long as they hit the mountaintop, how they get there should be irrelevant. And if it is relevant to you as a leader, you're majoring in the minor.
I 100% agree with you. I think that there's so much push from leadership for it has to move through these specific tasks or these specific email scripts or call scripts. It ends up not having a personality pretty much in that sales process, so that they can't make it their own. You know, everybody sells it, I think, a little bit differently. What, in terms of the leadership, you mentioned a good point in terms of that adoption mentality. Is there anything that you've learned that helps them see the other side faster, to be like, hey, it's not going to get there super fast, or hey, give them the freedom to be able to follow their own method?
Absolutely.
Here's the guardrails. You
just nailed it. It's the guardrails, right? I did a talk. We hosted an in-person sales leadership summit in Calgary last November, and my talk was on how to create consistency, predictability, and scale in your revenue organization. And I started by sharing 3 different types of sales organizations. And the first one, the image was a green field, right? Beautiful, open green field. And I asked the audience, why is this a terrible sales organization to work for? And they're like, well, there's no boundaries. I'm like, yeah, what this looks like is, hey, Janelle, welcome aboard. Go sell stuff. My door's always open. Click. And they're like,
terrifying.
Okay. And of course, the second image was a prison yard. And we can all imagine what the prison yard looks like. We've been talking about that a little bit. And then the third image was I think I got a football playing field. And I said, well, why is this a great sales organization to work for? And they said, because we have clearly defined boundaries. We have clear expectations on what your role is, what my role is, what I will do to support you, and also what I won't do to support you. I was facilitating our sales leader growth series this morning, and one of our learners, their big victory from the last time we saw each other was to not rescue. And they had a meeting with their sales team. They have these regular, they call them roadblock meetings. The sales leader's name is Enrique, and he's an incredible sales leader. And he sat back in that meeting and just let the team flow. And all of a sudden people are like, oh yeah, I've run into that. Here's how I handle that. Or, and then someone else will be like, oh, well, I said this. And he's like, it was so great because I could sit back and just let them flow. And also he set them up for success, right? He coached them, he encouraged them. And so that way the team was self-sufficient. Most leaders, when they first hear me talk about creating a self-sufficient team, they're terrified. Because they're like, well, what's my role? And I'm like, well, what's Andy Reid's role on the Kansas City Chiefs? Right? Like, he's got the best quarterback in the world. And by the way, don't beat me up for that. He's generally accepted as the best quarterback in the world, Patrick Mahomes. Yet he has multiple coaches, right? Andy Reid's the head coach. Like, there's 2 or 3 layers between Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid, even though they talk regularly on the sidelines. So as a leader, we want to get our team to self-sufficiency, and we want to get our new hires to self-sufficiency as quickly as possible, because the faster we can get our new hires to self-sufficiency, that is an exponential return on our investment. And it allows us to work on the business instead of getting sucked into the business where we might end up rescuing.
It's such an exciting moment to see that magic happen where you've allowed them to essentially have a safe space. Because I think that there's also this component of fear. I think that there's really a lot of times salespeople will have ideas or questions, even to the marketing side, like a collaborative component, and they're kind of roadblocked. And so having that ability to have the alignment and the ability to say, hey, this isn't working, and not be judged or put down or, faulted for doing and asking questions, that's really incredible good for them. Do you think, you mentioned it earlier, and we've come across this too, the tied to comp. We've had conversations with leadership of, hey, have you considered, you can't get them to do what you want. Have you considered tying those tasks in the CRM to comp? I could never do that, but I'd love to hear your opinion.
So salespeople are creatures of their compensation plan. However, humans, so if we look at conflict, all conflict is going to result from a misalignment of goals, behaviors, values, or more likely in business, incentives. So if we look at like marketing and sales, well, marketing is incentivized to raise brand awareness, right? Raise that. Let's just use that as an example. Like, there's lots of different things marketing can be incentivized to do, but let's just say raise brand awareness is their thing. Well, sales is responsible for growing revenue. So the sales leader and the marketing leader look at each other, and now they're at loggerheads because there are different incentives, and what the sales leader thinks marketing, quote unquote, should be doing, and what marketing thinks what sales, quote unquote, should be doing are 2 very different things. And so this ties into compensation in the sales plan. I firmly believe that, number one, all roles in the organization should have a variable compensation component from the front door all the way up. Second of all, if you're going to create adoption in any change, and that was my second book, was on the human side of change, there's got to be an incentive for someone to do it, because human beings don't like to change, right? Our brain is wired to keep us safe, which usually means stuck. And change is all about adapting behavior. So we actually had a colleague of mine that one year our executive decided that they were going to have extra incentives for what they called strategic products. And this happens in a lot of industries, right? The senior executive like, we want to sell more of this next year. So here's an extra bit of comp for that. Unfortunately, what the senior executive didn't do is make it on net new.
Oh, no.
They made it on overall. And so my colleague, their 90% of their client base bought that product already. So 1 year later, they had a very nice basement renovation paid for by incentives that they never actually earned. So shockingly, at the end of the 1 year, the senior executive sat down and went, we've made a terrible mistake. Let's claw that back. Let's redo the comp plan. And unfortunately, my colleague did not adapt to the new comp plan. And they ended up getting demotivated, and they ended up leaving because they didn't adapt to the new reality. So comp is an incredibly powerful driver. What is an even more powerful driver is understanding the personal goals of each member on your team, because our people don't work for us because they love us or our business. They work for us because they believe working for us gets them to their personal goals faster than going to work for someone else. And anytime someone leaves because of more money, a bigger title, flexibility, whatever, it's code for, I think I can get to my personal goals faster by going across the street and working for that other person. So we coach all of our leaders to understand the personal goals of each member of their team and tie achieving the personal goals to achieving the corporate goals, because that will create a rocket ship.
Awesome. That's very interesting. What do you think in terms of key things, like one thing for a salesperson, like an individual salesperson and then a sales leader?
Sure.
What do you think is like the absolute most important thing that they should do?
So we'll start with the seller. It is to have the mindset that it's never about you. It's always about your buyer and keeping them safe. And actually, that relates to something else. So that's the mindset. The thing to do is to gather more information you give. We at Sandler believe professional sellers get paid on the information gathered, not the information given. That's not the way I was trained. I've been in sales since I was 19. I was always taught to find someone who would listen, show up, throw up, beg for the business, handle stalls and objections. By the way, I made a lot of money for my employers and myself. I also worked way harder. And I said and did things that were not in my best interest. So when we keep the focus on creating buyer safety, it's not about me, it's about them, and gathering more information than we give, we typically close more with less effort. On the sales leader side, a leader's number one job is to create clarity. So if your sellers, if your team members, if you're not a direct sales leader, if you lead another type or part of the organization, if your team members are not doing the activities that you think they should be doing on a consistent basis to hit all your goals, there's a lack of clarity in that, in something. And so we have to put the ugly mirror on us and go, where have I created a lack of clarity? And then the other thing, so that's the mindset, right? Clarity. The thing to do is make coaching a process, not an event. Too often coaching is, well, I coached Janelle. Janelle is fixed. It's like, no, Janelle's not a light switch. You didn't just turn Janelle from off to on. Like, it's going to take time.
Tuesday at 4:00 can get crossed off.
Exactly. Yeah, we're good. Janelle is going to go out and totally crush it this year. Not going to happen. And so we have to have this ongoing, and it might sound overwhelming. It's really not, because the time-consuming part is up front to really understand, okay, what's going on? Is this a mindset that Janelle has that's preventing her from doing a specific activity? Is it that she's not doing the activity enough, like making cold calls, just as an example, right? Is she not making enough cold calls, or is she not cold calling the right person, right? She's calling sort of at the level where people can only say no or think it over instead of no or yes. And then lastly, okay, well, or is it more of a technique thing? Janelle's got the right mindset. She's crushing it on the activity side. However, the ratios of number of cold calls to conversations or conversations to meetings are not what we expect them to be, or not what because we have a data set, what they should be in order for her to be successful. Now I can effectively coach, and then we can keep iterating. Because again, going back to the Patrick Mahomes example, or my youngest daughter's a swimmer, if we want to use Michael Phelps as an example, all world champions at whatever you want to measure, whether it's sports or arts or business, they all have coaches. And they all are consistently going back to that coach going, okay, did that, implemented it, here's where it worked, here's where it didn't, let's go again.
That's such a good point in terms of the ongoing, again, that ongoing component. It is not a one and done self-improvement on the individual or the leadership side. I think fuels into that culture, that sales culture. Have you seen, work with all different size organizations, different industries? You know, we're obsessed with company culture here. So how does company culture, have you seen it influence the overall company culture? How does it kind of bleed into each other?
I love that you asked about this. Actually, I spoke at Sandler Summit in March on how to intentionally design a sales culture. And corporate culture, this is it, everybody who's listening. Your corporate culture is the behavior that is approved implicitly and explicitly. That's what your corporate culture is. And what I hear a lot of is, well, our culture comes from our values. Actually, it's the reverse. Your values are the behaviors that we allow the world to see. So our values don't inform our culture informs our values, because let's say we have a value of being customer centric. I'm sure both our clients would like to hear that we have a value of being customer centric. Well, if the behavior that our current clients get exposed to is continual calls from our salespeople going, want to buy more stuff, or they get continually bombarded with emails going, hey, we've got this on sale, and hey, we've got this new program, and hey, what if you signed up for this? That ain't being customer centric. So there's a disconnect between our words and our behavior. And at the end of the day, humans are animals, right? Like, well, we are biologically animals, and animals have no capacity to process language. And what separates us from the animals is we have this wonderful prefrontal cortex that allows language processing and understanding all that. However, most of our day-to-day is controlled by the lizard brain, the limbic system, the amygdala, whatever we want to call it. And that has no capacity to process language. So if there's a disconnect between words and behavior is always going to win out. So our clients in this example are going to be like, yeah, I know Hamish says he's customer centric, but he just always seems to be trying to sell me more stuff. That doesn't really seem to be about me. It seems to be really more about him. And so we have to understand as leaders that what we say that we value and what we actually value could be two different things. So I would encourage the listeners, if you ever want to find out what your corporate values actually are, go talk to some of your clients, and especially some of them who might have fired you recently, because you'll get lots of good insights from them.
It's a good way to think about change, right? Like get that intel, make improvements. I think with all of that, a lot of times people bury their head in the sand in terms of their values, their culture. On paper, one thing. In effort, very different. What made you write about change management?
Well, I will give full credit to Yusuf, who's my editor on both my first book on accountability and my second book. And he came to me and said, hey, man, I love working with you. And Yusuf is, by the way, the best editor who makes my words better. Like, he doesn't try to make it his words. Like, he makes my stuff better. I really love working with Yusuf. And so he came to me and said, hey, got another book for me? And
I've got some free time.
I got some, yeah. And literally I didn't at the time because my second daughter had literally just been born. And so there were some family conversations about like, hey, last time you wrote a book, we had one and they were an infant. They were sleeping most of the time. Now we got two. So how's that going to work? And what really made me want to talk about change, and specifically it's the human side of change. Because what's the number? It's above 80%. It's like 80+% of all corporate change initiatives fail. And if you think about all the money and the time and all the hidden costs that go into that. And so I really wanted to write about change from the human perspective. And that's actually, I sort of half jokingly said, Janelle's not a light switch, but that's what change is. Today we don't have a CRM. Tomorrow we have HubSpot. Today, our company is everybody in the office, and tomorrow we're all remote. That's change. On, off. Easy. Humans don't change. They transition. And transition is very similar to the stages of grief. There's only 4 in transition stage, which is denial, resistance, exploration, and acceptance. And what I wanted to help leaders understand is they go through all of those emotions, all those stages of transition, but they do it 3, 6, 9, 12, 18 months before they roll it out to their teams. And then they're shocked that when they stand up in front of their team and go, we've got a CRM now, everyone doesn't go, hey, boss, great idea. Can't imagine why we didn't do this before. And
Sign me up.
And then all of a sudden they're like, well, what's going on here? And why are we doing this? And then the leader is thrown off because they expected that they would walk out and everybody would be like, yeah. And that's not the way it works. It's what I talk about in the book, it's 20-60-20. And I call them angels, agnostics, and atheists, mostly because I'm an author and I like alliteration. There is no religious connotations in anything here. Angels are your champions, right? They'll be like, yeah, boss, got it. We'll do it. No problem at all. The atheists are the ones where you could be talking about changing the coffee in the break room. And they're going to be like, no, never going to happen. And then the agnostics are the ones who are the fence sitters, right? And usually those are the veterans on the team who have probably been through way too many flavor of the month type changes. Oh, yeah, boss went to a conference and saw a speaker, and now we're going to do this. And so in traditional change management, what we are coached to do is go down to those atheists, those change deniers, and beg, threaten, cajole, incentivize them to get on side. And what I will tell the listeners is they're not going to. They're there by choice. Let them go be more successful elsewhere. Instead, work with your champions, work with your angels to then go down and talk to the agnostics and start to bring them up a little bit. Because sometimes cousin Steve or cousin Sally has to go say the same thing mom or dad has been saying. But when cousin Steve or cousin Sally says it, it's more likely that they'll be listened to. And so that's how we can get more of our agnostics enrolled in the change. And by the way, some of them might not make it, right? Some of them might not make it. And that's a key part of the book is, as a leader, we need to, when we first start planning this change rollout out, is to write down all the first names of the people in our organization, specifically our direct reports, and put an X or a check mark next to each person's name as to whether or not they will make it through the change and on the other side. This is not a judgment of them as a human being. Everyone, I believe, is a wonderful human being who might be a bad fit for the role. And they might have been a good fit for this role, but they're going to be a bad fit for that role in the future. And unfortunately, I've had to coach several CEOs who had a key lieutenant that in front of the team said all the right things. They stood up behind the boss and they said, yep, we're going to do this. And then when everyone went away, they went to the boss's office, closed the door and said, hey, listen, I love you. I love this business. I just don't see myself being part of this organization if this is the direction we're going. And of course, that leader had planned on that lieutenant being a key part of the success of that change initiative. And so now they're devastated emotionally because they really love that person. And they're like, how the heck am I going to keep this on the road? And so doing that list of who's going to make it through gets the leader in the mindset, again, 3, 6, 9, 12 months in advance of how they might need to start recruiting for an individual to step in on a last minute basis, because the leader doesn't need to be stepping in. That's not their role. Their role is to lead, not to do. And so being prepared in advance reduces the potential that the change is going to slide off the road because a key lieutenant went away.
That's such a great analogy. I think in a great example of, I know it's happened, heard it many, many times. So not an easy mindset to overcome, I think, in terms of when it happens. But I think that deeper bench and having the plan in place and being open to having it ahead of that curve before anything comes through makes everything have a little bit more peace of mind.
Absolutely. And by the way, as I say to the leaders I work with, I want to be wrong. I want to be wrong. I don't want that person to leave because they are a key lieutenant. You have a great personal relationship. I want to be wrong. I have way too much data, and human beings are human beings, and they have their own hopes and fears and dreams and worldviews, and we cannot impose ours on them. We have to roll with theirs and set them up for success, and be prepared in the background that should they say, I'm out, we can say, thank you for your service, best wishes to you, and we can roll that next person in, whether it's a promotion internally, or we could bring in a consultant, or in the book, I call it an MVP, a minimum viable person, who can come in and just do that one thing we need them to do. That gives us, as you said, great peace of mind as a leader, and it allows us to keep those change initiatives moving forward, even when someone who we thought was going to be key decides to move on.
Great advice. Awesome. One final question for you. What does finding business happy mean to you?
It means that I supported somebody today. My daily question is, who did I support today? And that could have been a barista at Starbucks because I treated them like a human being, which is not a common experience for them. Or it was because I supported my daughter or a friend or whatever. And so when I can say, who did I support today? And usually the answer is more than one person, that makes my world go round.
Oh, my heart grew 3 more sizes. One of our questions internally is, what's the last nice thing somebody has done for you? And then the flip side is, what's the last nice thing that you've done for somebody else? So I love that mentality of how can you help somebody? Great advice as always. I'll make sure to share a bunch of resources too on how to connect and find you and your content. Thank you so very much for coming. And as always, appreciate you.
Appreciate you too. Thanks, Janelle.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you everyone for listening to this episode of Finding Business Happy. Until next time, talk soon.
Thank you for listening to Finding Business Happy with me, Janelle McGrath, the founder of Market Veep. If you want a roadmap to finding and keeping your business happy, download our free guide now at marketveep.com/happy.